spiritual training, and they were missing some of the great opportunities that we had.
Wow. Now, when you studied in Japan, did you study mainly or solely under male masters?
Well, I did make a short visit to practice with a female master, but it wasn't really a match to my training needs. So I did practice almost entirely. I practiced in 3 temples for a little bit longer times, and all 3 temples were led by men and were male training monasteries.
Ah. Now, when you choose to take that path towards enlightenment or towards your own spiritual development, what is required of you? I've seen so many stories, the Hollywood versions, and I've read certain books about it, but there are so many hours per day of meditation, as I understand it, and study, and what else? What would you have to do to acquire the, to acquire the knowledge?
To enter a training monastery?
Yes.
Well, I think that, we have our own version in the West now of training places, and I myself have a retreat center where people can come and train. And so we ask people to enter just where they are and see how it appeals to them. But sooner or later, they recognize that what you're doing in terms of finding how to develop your spiritual consciousness, you're undoing when you're thinking and engaging yourself in ego games throughout the day. So some concentrated effort to overturn that energy is required. And so this is why they have long periods of practice. It's like being in the ocean. If you get knocked down by one wave, you can get right back up and go about your business. And it's the same with your ego. If you get knocked down by one wave of meditation, right after you walk out the door, your ego will pick itself right up and start in again. If you are knocked down by wave after wave after wave, the ego kind of sinks to the bottom. So the particular training temple I went to in Japan, where I could do week-long retreats with the men, I couldn't live there because it was a male training monastery, but I could stay with them for about a week. In that temple, we got up at 3 in the morning and started meditating. So that means I got up at 2:30 to get myself together, and kind of in a daze at 3 a.m., and then we would stay up throughout the day till about 11 at night to continue.
Wow, that is quite a discipline. That in itself would lead to something, I'm sure. Just the sheer nature of the unusualness of the hours and what you were doing.
Yeah, it's the same in the Catholic tradition. They wake you up for your prayers at certain hours of the day, and so the fact that your sleep is disrupted throws off your whole mental functioning, and you just can't put yourself together with the same level of defensiveness and organization. And as you start to fall apart a little, if you don't go crazy, you find another source of awareness that isn't in that organized cognitive space. So that's what they're aiming for. But actually the hardest thing for me was not, I'm pretty good with sleep deprivation, so that wasn't the worst thing for me. Although I must say for the first few hours of the day when this would go on for a week, from let's say between 3 and 6, I felt like I was dead. And I was just a walking dead person. But the hardest thing for me was the customs that they use in the male training temples, which is a lot of beatings. And,
oh, really?
Yeah, they still use a stick, which they hit the monks on their shoulders with. And so for the new monks, it's quite the hazing process.
Oh, my.
And they would get 4 hits per shoulder, on 4 hits per each shoulder, maybe 6 times an hour for 15 or 20 hours a day. So you could imagine that they lost some skin fairly quickly in that process.
Oh, and
it was very, very hard for me to sit and do meditation through that brutality. so what I came to, and that was the hardest part for me.
Yeah.
So what I came to deal with was, okay, I think there's something in this training that I need to get to, which was training with this great Zen Master. Unfortunately, I do not understand this cultural aspect, which is the hitting. So I have a choice now. I can be quiet and pay attention to my meditation, or I can leave. But I cannot sit here and keep agonizing over the fact that they're hitting each other.
Right.
So I decided, since I'd traveled 5,000 miles, I would see what else there was there. And not that I ever approved of the hitting, but I also recognized something else, that as a person from another culture, this is kind of like Army boot camp or a football training. It's not something I can the boys are kind of rough with each other. And for me to stand up and say this is intolerable wouldn't mean anything to them. They wanted to go through the same training that their ancestors had gone through, and this was somehow was like a rite of passage for them in their Zen training. And so this was something that mattered to them. They didn't want me to stop it. So even if I could have stopped it, that wasn't what it was about for them. So that took a lot of my working with. I don't approve of that kind of training. On the other hand, I had to decide whether there was something that I would come to understand by being there in this authentic Zen training experience in Japan. Because my feeling about what's happening in the West was that some authentic Japanese masters came over and tried to teach us what they did in Japan. And then when they died, we were left with something which we thought was what they did in Japan. But it wasn't a first-hand experience. So I wanted to have first-hand experience. And after having the first-hand experience of what is it like for your mind to open up in Zen training under these circumstances, I came to understand the kind of spiritual awakening they were aiming for, and came back determined to find culturally appropriate methods for achieving the same kind of spiritual awakening.
And did you find those methods?
Well, we'll have to ask my students in another years to see how many of them became enlightened. But here's what I decided to work with. I am a psychologist. Right. And I felt that what they were aiming for was breaking down the attachment to the body. And the way they were breaking down the attachment to the body was through these beatings, through the sleep deprivation. Well, your body is the primary thing that you cling to and that you take pride in. So if you let go of your attachment to that, something happens. But I felt like, well, it's impossible for us to ask that of Westerners. First of all, we won't be able to do it without being sued. And second of all, it's just not part of our culture, this kind of samurai rough trade. But that there is something that we're very attached to, and that is our pride. We're very attached to our pride and all the games that we run. And so as a psychologist, what I work on with my students is uncovering their psychological defense mechanisms, and I think there's a lot of pain there. So rather than physically, I try to help them see the ways that they play games psychologically to build themselves up when they're fearful, and try to help them pull those off in a way that they can use and encounter the pain that's underneath. And so that's basically how I work. I work with traditional Zen methods of periods of meditation, and I put less emphasis on some of the ritualized parts of Zen, which they do at large centers, and more emphasis on the interpersonal realm and the intrapsychic realm where people are playing some kind of mind games.
Oh, interesting. Well, it sounds like a much more comprehensive and humane approach to enlightenment. And after all, everything is evolving somehow. It may not appear that way to us at times, but there is
rather than imitate. I think it's good that we evolve. I think it's not so good for us to imitate what our Asian teachers brought over.
Exactly, what was just because it worked then, and
for them in that culture. And so what I came to feel from my training in Japan was that I understood the feeling of practice in Japan. And so how could I create a similar feeling of difficulty and hardship and devotion to practice? So I do some of the ritualized trainings, and we do also sew our own robes, and each stitch that we sew, we take refuge in the Buddha. So there are some things that we do that are part of the tradition, and there are other ways in which I relate to my students, and we relate to each other as a community that are different.
Well, you know, I had a thought as you were talking about the beatings and so on and so forth and the purpose of them, and I had an image of people floating in the water tanks with body deprivation, where you are floating in a tank of water and you're, you know, that is something that I think is designed to do something similar, to kind of free the higher, more subtle bodies from the lower ones and the ego and the attachments.
Well, I think that's right. I think that's one method in one place where we can have the experience of liberation, is in those sensory deprivation tanks. Of course, we don't want to spend our life in a sensory deprivation tank. So the whole point is, how do we take our experience from the sensory deprivation tank or from the meditation cushion? How do we take that experience of awareness back into our life and integrate it into this whole complex machinery that we're carrying around for survival? And I think that's the trick, and that's where I'm really working with people, is how do they notice what is the feeling in their body when they start defending themselves and running their games on themselves and other people? What does that feel like, and how can their attention be awakened in that moment so they can choose to let go again? Because if we limit ourselves to the time we spend in a deprivation tank or on the meditation cushion, it's only so many hours a day. We need to be able to carry forth the uncovering and the awakening of awareness into our daily activities. You know, the Tibetans also have a similar something to the deprivation tank, which is called a dark retreat, where they don't see the light of day and they sit and do their meditation, you know, in a dark cave or something like that. I haven't done it yet, but I'm thinking that I might want to do that in my sauna one day. Have a dark retreat, close myself in a sauna, not turn on the heat, but just stay in there and see what that. I think that these are very good training techniques, and the important thing for us as Westerners is, you know, people get injured trying to sit too long in a half lotus or full lotus. So there are other methods like the sensory deprivation methods, and also doing dream yoga at night, where you call upon your awareness. I call upon my awareness every night before I go to sleep and ask that I may awaken to the dream that I'm creating in my mind, and I try to do that during the day as well. Oh, that's a beautiful thought. That's a very helpful tool. After I wore out my knees doing these meditations for long periods of time, I thought I have to find some things the other methods that work for me and for other people. Really, either that or get some strong knee pads. Well, I'm afraid it's the inner knee pads that are the problem. You know, when I was in Japan, I saw an abbot who was more than 100 years old, one of the head abbots of the largest training monastery at Heiji, still sat in a full lotus position. Unfortunately, they had to carry him in on a palanquin. He could no longer walk. So I myself had made the decision to sit in whatever position I could sit in, but to continue walking. And I think that this is an important point. Yes, that seems like a practical application. Well, you know, the other thing that I'm thinking, too, is that this must be quite a difficult task for those who are following this path, who are, you know, having to work jobs in corporations, which is a patriarchal foundation, and which does not really honor the much of anything other than making money. That must be quite a difficult thing to work on ego and connecting with spirit. Stay alive. Yeah, we have to stay alive in this culture, right? Yeah. So well, I think it's always been the case that people who have sought spiritual awakening as the primary function of being human People have thought that